Next, from the Attorney General's office in Springfield, Attorney General Lisa Madigan holds a press conference with a coalition of law enforcement officials as they announce their combined efforts to crack down on the sale of synthetic drugs. This runs about 25 minutes.
Okay, so we've gathered all of you today to announce a major development in Operation Smoked Out. Last Friday, investigators from my office, joined by the Jerseyville Police and the Jersey County Sheriff's Department and the South Central Illinois Drug Task Force, scored a major victory in our efforts to stop the spread of synthetic drugs in Illinois. In the course of the operation, we were able to uncover one of Central Illinois' major distributors of synthetic drugs, William F. Brockman Wholesale Tobacco and Candy, located in Jerseyville. There we found 600 packages of synthetic drugs with a street value of $32,000. Upon further investigation, the officers also retrieved an additional 1,500 packages of illegal drugs valued at $65,000 from the home of a Brockman Wholesale employee. In all, we were able to prevent over $110,000 worth of illegal synthetic drugs from reaching stores throughout Central Illinois. This wholesaler is suspected of supplying synthetic drugs to retailers and communities as far south as Benton and all the way to Decatur. So with this development, we have reached a critical moment in our effort. It marks the next step in our work to confront this growing problem on all fronts. When we began last fall, we had a simple but very important goal of raising awareness about these drugs among law enforcement, prosecutors, medical professionals, educators, and parents. Because synthetic drugs were still a mystery to many, and that is especially true of parents, but they were extremely popular with teenagers and with young adults. But they often and continue to have very tragic results. Many kids that we have spoken with who have taken synthetic drugs tell us that they were under the impression that because these chemicals were for sale in a store, that they were not just legal, but that they were safe. Unfortunately, far too many children have learned that when you ingest synthetic drugs, you are really playing Russian roulette with your body and with your brain. And so since then, we have kept on in our work to raise awareness about the deadly dangers of synthetic drugs, and we have also visited communities throughout Illinois, going to retail locations who are still selling these drugs even though they are illegal. With last week's development, we're making advances on another front in this fight, and that is to reduce the supply chain. Add to that our legislative efforts, and you can start to see the wholesale nature of our fight against synthetic drugs. Here in Springfield, my office has put forward a bill to make all formulations of synthetic drugs illegal under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. This legislation will allow us to move beyond the efforts to outlaw certain chemical makeups of synthetic drugs, as has been done in recent years both here in Illinois and in states throughout the nation. This legislation, combined with our efforts on the ground in communities all across the state, is a full-scale pushback against the synthetic drug trade in Illinois. I know that we all share a sense of urgency to get our arms around what I would deem one of the most dangerous public health threats that we've seen in many years. Unfortunately, there are no simple solutions, and that is why it is vital that we all continue to work together. Law enforcement, with prosecutors, with educators, with medical professionals, and especially with parents and with teenagers and young adults to educate them on the very, very significant dangers of these drugs. And so I want to thank all of the members of law enforcement that are here with me today for the incredible work that they have done, and I know that we will continue to do together to fight against synthetic drugs. Next, let me bring up I'm going to bring up the Sheriff of Jersey County, Mark Calal. Sheriff.
Thank you. Together we can. Not to take away from anything that anyone's done here. Thankfully for the Attorney General's Office, South Central Illinois Drug Task Force, the Jerseyville Police Department, and Jersey County Sheriff's Office, this is what they've come up with. This is a great step forward in our today's fight against not only the illegal drugs, but the synthetics now. It's an everyday fight that we fight. And that's something that when we come up with something like this, it's a great sign of our efforts. And once again, without the teamwork, I don't know that this would have been possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Next, let me bring up the Montgomery County Under Sheriff, Rick Robbins.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon. I'm Rick Robbins, Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. About 2 months ago, we've seen the Illinois Attorney General's Office, Lisa Madigan, and her staff going around the state doing the proactive work that you ultimately see in front of us. Sheriff Jim Vazzi of Montgomery County contacted Lisa Madigan's office and requested assistance in our own county of Montgomery County. And Friday, all of this stemmed from the beginning portion of Montgomery County where we obtained about 200 packets of the same items in front of you. This reminds me a lot of the methamphetamine days a few years ago when all this started. Law enforcement was a little bit behind the curve, legislation was a little bit behind the curve, but together collectively with legislation, law enforcement, and the media, we came together and we put a huge dent in methamphetamine. And this is what needs to happen again with the synthetic drugs that you see in front of us and that our teenagers are utilizing daily. We need to act together, and with the media, law enforcement, and legislation, we have to get the word out to the parents of these teenagers that this is not something good. This is not legal. Just because it has a pretty picture on the front of it does not mean a teenager may utilize it. So the combined efforts of the law enforcement and all of us together, we can make a difference. So please, everyone, talk to your children, talk in school. Communication will help this out. Thank you.
Okay, before I bring up the Litchfield Police Chief, let me apologize because I think I introduced some folks as being with Jacksonville. No, that's Jerseyville. That's what the J''Ville is on my sheet. So all apologies to the good people in Jerseyville for misidentifying who your fine members of law enforcement are. Next, let me bring up the Litchfield Police Chief, and I'm having him come up and speak today in large part because they have seen, unfortunately, firsthand in a relatively small community in our state, the tragic impact that synthetic drugs can have. Chief.
It does take a team to impact in such a decisive way one of the new scourges in our communities. December the 3rd of 2011, we lost a young man by the name of Jeremy Busick, who was chain smoking Mad Hatter, which is one of the name brands of the synthetics that were available at that time. And by chain smoking, I mean he was smoking at about the same quantities as someone who smokes about a pack a day of cigarettes. Obviously a significant impact, different than the way a person who smokes cigarettes would be impacted. Over the course of that day, he chain smoked enough of that it altered his mood into such a way that he entered into a state of depression and frustration that he couldn't come out of. And later that evening, he hung himself. The impacts of things like that in small communities like ours are significant because everybody knows everybody else. And we know these families across the county. So the work that we do with the Sheriff's Office and the South Central Illinois Drug Task Force and the State Police, we all have a vested interest in it because it makes it personal. And we want to renew our commitment as a body of law enforcement officials serving in Central Illinois that we can't afford to lose any more of our young people, and hence the reason that we're attacking this in the way that we are. Thank you.
We would be happy to answer questions if you have them.
Attorney General, let's see. Where does it stand legally? I know before in one of your previous press conferences you had noted the problem with trying to take these drugs off the street was that they would merely change the name. Where do you stand on that as far as making sure that you're not just chasing the dog's tail, so to speak, but them changing the names and labeling?
So the first iteration of laws that came out, not just in Illinois, but across the country in individual states, what they were doing, and let me back you up even one more step to give you a little more of a perspective. When we're talking about synthetic drugs, we're usually talking about two different things, right? We're talking about synthetic marijuana, most of which is what you see here. Those packages at a distance look like old-fashioned film canisters. And you're talking about another product that is either, similar to synthetic cocaine or synthetic methamphetamine, a powdery cocaine-like substance. Those are purely made by chemicals being applied to either the plant material or some sort of a powder material. What they allege is that you will get a similar sort of high to if you had taken marijuana or cocaine or methamphetamine. The reality is, though, you have no idea what kind of chemicals you're actually putting in your body, and not only do you not know what the chemicals are, but you have no idea what the strength of those chemicals is going to be, such that you end up with results, sometimes not even from chain smoking, the way the Litchfield chief described. Sometimes it's just one time, because you may have ended up with a batch of this where it's 500 times the strength of what you would have anticipated if you had been smoking marijuana. And so what happens then, the receptors in your brain are overwhelmed to the point that you suffer from severe hallucinations, you suffer from paranoia. There are kids who their heart rate increases, they have heart attacks, they end up having suicidal thoughts, homicidal thoughts. They have described to us that they've blacked out. They felt like they were being chased by demons, and they were non-responsive. And so we have also seen an increase in the number of emergency room visits, particularly with teenagers who have ingested these products. So the legislative efforts had initially been directed at the different types of chemicals that were known to be used by the drug manufacturers. And so actually, if you pick up some of these packages and you flip them over, you'll see that they claim that, this package does not contain GWH 18, GWH 222. They'll have various numbers because those are the chemical descriptors. The next iteration of laws really attempted to say all of the ones that we know, in addition to anything else that could be an analog, a derivative of those. What we're trying to do with the current legislation is to even move one step beyond that, which is to say anything that is a synthetic drug that is intended to be taken and is taken by people internally is simply outlawed. And so our goal is to really take this out of, in some ways, the criminal code, out of a requirement to do the testing, but to recognize that you might put a sticker on this that says it's not for human consumption, but nobody is paying $100 for a container of potpourri. Nobody has ever actually used this for that purpose. The purpose they've used it for is to get high, and unfortunately far too many children have become very sick, and some have even died.
Does your office have any indication how old the synthetic drug trade in Illinois is?
We certainly know that, many of the stores that we go to, it's the gas stations, the convenience stores, the tobacco stores. Certainly prior to January, there wasn't a store we went into where they were not selling the synthetic marijuana. Oftentimes they were also selling the synthetic cocaine, the bath salts. That at the time was not necessarily displayed on the counter. You'd have to ask for it, and sometimes it was under the counter, sometimes it was in a back room, and they would go get it for you. What I can tell you is now, at this point, I would say on average 50% of the stores we're going in are still selling these products even though they are illegal in the state of Illinois.
So it's legal in some states, these synthetic drugs?
I would argue that it is certainly not the intention of most states that they are legal at all, but as was described, to some extent, the law has been chasing the development of these products. And so what the drug makers then do is if they look at a law and they say, well, here are the chemicals that have been outlawed, well, we'll just reformulate it again. And obviously the concern with that is twofold, not just that they're evading the law, but now they're using chemicals that are even less known, even less understood, and we don't know what those reactions are going to be when somebody ingests them. And so, the more attenuated this becomes, the worse the problem is.
Would you say that the field situation at this point would just be to have a federal ban on this so you guys don't have to keep going back every couple of months to keep,
And the DEA does, in fact, have a ban on certain chemicals, and we have, in fact, been working with the feds. But you can understand the problem. This is very lucrative for the people who are selling this. I mean, the amount of money they are making is, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. And so we are going to continue to have to work on the law enforcement side to reduce the supply, and in addition work on raising awareness with the media and others, to also reduce the demand. It is, as somebody said, it is a similar problem in terms of how we have to attack this drug, any other drug, you've got to deal with both sides of the equation.
Is this a problem throughout the state? I mean, are you seeing this in Chicago and suburbs as well?
This is definitely a problem throughout the state of Illinois. There's no region, no area of the state that is not, it's been untouched. We found this in Chicago, in the suburbs, central Illinois, southern Illinois, western Illinois, northern Illinois. And unfortunately, it's not just that we're finding the drugs, we're finding that children have died because they've taken these drugs.
Does this Mr. Brockman that you named, does he face charges? And to what extent is it a problem to bring prosecution against individuals selling this? Because
We're continuing to investigate. Sure. Well, we're continuing to investigate and work our way up the chain here, so to speak. So it will remain to be seen what charges may be filed against him.
Do you have an idea of where the drugs are coming from? Are they actually being manufactured in Illinois, or are they coming from out of state or out of state?
I can tell you that in general, the chemicals that, for instance, are sprayed on the plant material to manufacture the synthetic marijuana, which tends to go by the name of K2 or spice, probably the largest producer of those chemicals is China. Those chemicals are then shipped into the country. They are then, diluted, constituted, sprayed onto the plant material, and so the manufacturing process, from what we can tell, tends to take place here, but the actual manufacture of the chemicals, for the most part we're aware of, is taking place out of the country.
do we have any of the law enforcement people talk about what is the nature that they're seeing of this use among young people, and what, if any, are you doing as a proactive means of educating the kids against the dangers?
Mr. Dare?
Sure.
Introduce yourself again.
I'm Sergeant Wolf with the Jerseyville Police Department. I'm also the local DARE instructor. Been teaching DARE down there for 9 years. We have began a proactive campaign in Jerseyville under Chief Blackerby and under Assistant Chief Kirby that has developed not only the active DARE program in the 6th grade level. We teach now what we call a health administrative or health assistance program in the high school level. It's developed at the sophomore level. We cover all the health effects, side effects, causes of not only your typical street drugs that we deal with as far as marijuana goes, but we've also instituted a proactive approach in the high schools to address the K2 and the bath salts issues as far as health consequences, legal consequences, and social consequences that come by using those type of narcotics. Is it okay?
I guess for the Attorney General's office, does your office have any indication how many users have been hospitalized or died from?
We can probably get you some of those numbers. Initially, the figures that we were seeing were compilations of numbers that had come into the poison centers throughout the country. And so in the past 2 years, back in 2010, it was just short of 3,000 calls, both on the synthetic marijuana and the synthetic cocaine. Last year, for both of those products, it was well over 6,000. One of the numbers was close to 7,000 calls. And quite honestly, a lot of the medical information that we have been able to obtain and understand has come through the poison centers. So what happens typically is that if somebody or somebody's child essentially overdoses on some of this or has a severe reaction to it, they do one of two things. Either they show up in the emergency room. Emergency rooms most frequently call the poison center to figure out how to contend with this junk. And or you'll get, a family member or a friend of the kid who has the wherewithal to pick up the phone and call the poison center. And so, the numbers, when we look at it, listen, what I can tell you is in virtually every community we've been to, there is at least one tragic story that we are aware of, oftentimes multiple stories, the larger the communities become. We can also tell you that if you were to talk to the people in the hospital emergency rooms, they will testify to the extraordinary numbers. That was one of the things that happened when we were in Peoria. We had the head of the ER tell us that, they're seeing upwards of 10, 12 people a week coming in with severe reactions to some form of synthetic drug. It's very, very prevalent, and it's a little bit, unfortunately, under the radar, not at this point for law enforcement, but certainly at this point for most parents. They don't realize that their kids are taking this stuff, and they have no idea what the impact is going to be, and unfortunately, most kids.
Are you working with associations such as the Illinois Petroleum Marketers so that they inform their members not to be carrying these in their stores?
We have both, the retail merchants, the petroleum marketers, certainly when there is an association, that can be over the stores that have been, the most prevalent sellers of this. I think they're probably very well aware that, we're out there, and when I say we're, I don't mean just the Attorney General's office, but law enforcement in general is out there. And I will say, since the start of the year, we have seen fewer stores selling, but there are still stores out there, again, because the profit margin is such. One of those large containers goes for $100. $100. So, there's, again, a lot of money to be made, and there are certain people who are willing to, break the law in order to make money.
Now, I can imagine the law enforcement officers may have more to do than just visiting stores.
They do.
Is there a website that if the public goes in and sees this for sale at every store that they can?
I don't know if certainly they're welcome to get on the Illinois Attorney General's website and let us know. We would strongly encourage people, though, to go directly to local law enforcement. They're on the ground in the community, and they can respond immediately. And we do know that it is in large part, at least at the beginning of this, it oftentimes was the family who had lost a child who were the ones who were going into the stores and, telling them what had happened and making sure that they took these deadly products off the shelves and committed to not selling them. There have been a lot of ordinances that have been passed at the local level banning the sale of these products. And again, it's from the activism, that the parents have brought out on this issue.
How much is one of the individual testers that have?
How much is one? Here, come on, they'll tell you. It just depends. One of them I thought had a tag on it. Pick one up and flip it over. It might say $39. We won't arrest you.
About $40. I was looking to get your reaction to recent eavesdropping legislation that failed in the House. Wanting to know basically what your ideal eavesdropping legislation might look like, or best left up to the courts.
Well, right now, you're probably aware we're waiting for a decision from the Seventh Circuit on one of those cases. And so my guess is what the legislature will do is possibly wait and see what the Seventh Circuit has to say before they decide to run a new piece of legislation. So we'll see what they do. But yes, I tend to leave the legislating up to the legislature, unless it's my great idea. And then, and then we ask them to adopt it. But I think everyone's in kind of a holding pattern on that.
Attorney General, will your office be involved in any way with the Derek Smith investigation?
Right now, my understanding is that the legislature has put in place a special committee to do that investigation, and it's the federal government who is the one who brought charges and done the investigation on that.
Do you have any update with training that you've been hearing so much about?
Yeah, it passed out of the House unanimously last week, so it's on its way to the Senate. We're certainly hopeful that it will pass and go to the governor's desk as soon as possible. For those of you who aren't aware, cramming is the practice of basically services being charged onto your phone bill, and it amounts to billions of dollars worth of charges being put onto people's phone bills around the country every single year. Last July, I testified about the practice of cramming and my belief that we need to eliminate third-party charges on phone bills in front of the U.S. Senate. So we've run a piece of legislation that, as I mentioned, has gotten through the House successfully, and so again, it's on its way to the Senate. But what I would say in terms of consumer protection for those of you watching, look at your phone bill so that you can determine whether or not there are charges on there that you never authorized. We have found that these are charges that weren't authorized for services you don't want and you will never use. And so make sure that you actually look at your phone bill the same way that we tell people to look at their credit card bill, because far too many people don't realize that your phone number can in fact be used in a manner that is very similar to how a credit card is used. So yes, that's the update to cramming. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon. Take your pictures.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.